Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. If the Witness is defeated and its armies don't necessarily just fizzle away into dust, just in the same way that Oryx's Taken ended up outliving the king himself, the forces of the Witness are unlikely to just disband with great haste once their leader is destroyed. When a power vacuum emerges, inevitably someone will move to fill it, even if that moment takes time to arrive. The natural successors to the Witness are its disciples, and even though they all seemingly had various views and perspectives on their objectives, they were all exceedingly powerful individuals. So today we're going to examine the disciples in particular. Who the successor to the Witness might be is our big question. For whoever controls the Witness's armies and takes its place will be able to command its remaining forces, including the Dread, Scorn, Taken, Fallen, Vex, Cabal, and Hive that may still be under its sway right now. But first, a word from our sponsors at Starforge. The final shape is approaching, and if you're looking to take on the Witness, you need the right gear. That means you'll want to have a great PC, and you know what? Starforge can help you with just that. With a white glove service and 2 years parts and labor warranty, you can guarantee that you'll be getting a fantastic pre-built PC with none of the hassle of assembling it yourself at home. Regardless of whether you've got a large budget or not, there is a PC out there in their lineup for you. If you're on a budget, you can still get a great PC with their Horizon line, but if you're really looking to invest, you can go huge with one of their content creator line of Voyager PCs, with all the bells and whistles. Click my link in the description to see if Starforge has a PC that's right for you. And thanks again to Starforge for sponsoring this video. So I think we should really start off with this note. There are quite a few disciples that we've killed at this point. Calus, Rulk, and Nezarec are the obvious ones. But in the case of at least one of these disciples, maybe two, they've seemingly displayed a resilience beyond death that is quite remarkable. There's been some speculation that Rulk's remains were capable of some form of resurrection in regard to the lore tab of the Gouging Light Sparrow. However, the lore tab of that sparrow doesn't give us enough information to concretely confirm that that is Rulk speaking, and whilst it is a fair guess, I don't know that to be the case, so I'm going to put a pin in that theory. Not to mention that in that instance mentioned, those remains were nuked by the Guardian in question who happened to be getting infected with them. So, even if Rulk was capable of surviving beyond our mortal blows, I doubt that the remains of Rulk being nuked on Mars has really helped him to reconstitute himself. Nezarec, on the other hand, represents a far more immediate and compelling question, and is not only likely but almost certain to have survived his murder at our hands. He was able to commune with and influence people after his death at the hands of Savathun, but more importantly, he was able to briefly commune with us after we defeated him a second time in the Root of Nightmares raid. Nezarec has flaunted the boundaries of life and death so much that I think we just need to discuss him first, despite the presence of several unknowns that we'll talk about in a minute. He's so prominent that I've discussed this possibility before in another video about a year ago, but now we have a better idea about the state of the Witness's forces, and a better idea of what the system is going to look like after the Witness is potentially defeated, so I think it's even more important to consider Nezarec's place as a successor. Nezarec, as a final god of pain, has a clearly stated goal in mind, which is to feast upon the pain, fear, and anguish of a universe at his whims. It is what sustains him. In the raid, he actively salivates over the citizens of Neomuna who are living in a state of nightmarish disruption. He actively seeks and enjoys this torment, exquisite delicacies and foods that we have never seen before. But what's even more distressing is that the Witness has been masterfully teaching him in this regard. Its conquest of the systems that the Traveler occupied was done inefficiently from the perspective of conquest itself. But from the perspective of suffering, it would have been seen as a bountiful harvest. This is something we get to confirm thanks to Ido, who looked into the worlds that the Witness conquered, and whether they were visited by the Traveler or not. You can find this all the way back in the Entelechy lore from the Final Shape Collector's Edition. And the distressing thing that leads us to all our conclusions from that is simply this. Nezarec has had millennia to watch the Witness do this at a far more effective and powerful scale, and he now knows how to replicate that. If he is able to command the Black Fleet after the Witness's demise, we might be in a grand degree of trouble. Their objectives, of course, did differ. The Witness's means are very much the goal that Nezarec wishes to achieve, so their partnership made a certain degree of sense from that perspective, even if they didn't necessarily see eye to eye on the final shape. With that in mind, the Witness's forces would be ideal for Nezarec to command, as they are all puppets. For the most part, they are obedient to a fault and have little regard for themselves. These foes could be commanded to perform nearly any task the Witness desired, which would make them excellent tools for Nezarec to conduct his cruelty through. The Dread, by their very name and nature, appear to be a perfect force in this regard. They are made to inspire fear in the hearts of their foes, and in some cases are created from them, as appears to be obviously the case with the Husk, and in a stated note from Bungie, definitely the case with the Attendant and the Weaver. In fact, understanding the aspect of fear that this creates is rather important to understand why Nezarec might want these forces at his side. It always brings me back to a line from Mass Effect 3. If you've not played that game, by the way, go play it. It's absolutely fantastic. Ignore what everyone says about the ending. They have patched it since. Garrus at one point describes the efficacy of the enemy force that they're facing, called the Reapers. They do something similar to what's done with the Dread, turning their foes into cybernetic zombie-like monsters that battle against the Reaper's enemies. Now, to be clear, the Dread aren't cybernetic. They are twisted versions of combatants that we've seen before, by the looks of things. But it's the twisting, the psychological effect that has, which renders our similarity. Garrus describes it in Mass Effect 2 as being similar to losing two soldiers, the one who was turned into a Reaper Husk, and the other who can't bear to shoot his former fallen comrade. The Dread, taken and to a lesser extent with only the Elixni in mind, the Scorn, are all reflections of this way of accruing forces, a mass corruption of your enemy's forces that will deal serious damage to their ranks and also to the remaining troops' morale. But of course, as I've discussed before, Nezarec isn't just threatening as a successor because the Witness's forces are a great fit for his plans. He's also a threatening successor because he's come back to life before, and he has agents outside of any potential armies that he might command, agents that might look to see him resurrected. Nezarec has a nasty habit of, simply by his presence and influence, creating cults. This was most prevalent in the culture of the Scions, where he regularly saw innocent people of his selection being sacrificed to appease him. These cults also exist on Earth. Even since before the Golden Age, the text known as Of Hated Nezarec has been passed down generation by generation in one family. The instructions within this tome are unknown, but it's clear that the worship of this final god of pain, or even just an understanding of him, is something that is achieved through intimate, painful, merciless torture. Michael, one of the introduced members of the cult in the lore, actually practices this when he is first presented with the book as part of his inheritance at the age of 18. If it reads correctly, it's his father that's actually giving him this book. And he conducts a significant amount of torture on an innocent person as part of his initiation. Cults like these most likely sustain Nezarec in some fashion, and so unless we can properly stamp them out, I think it's hard to imagine a world where Nezarec's influence isn't truly gone. But even without them, you have to imagine that Nezarec feeds on pain from anywhere in the world. It is what sustains him, and so, even if he isn't actively being worshipped with such barbarism, he would be able to manifest if there was enough pain being inflicted. I think it's hard to imagine a world where Nezarec's influence is truly gone. There are also elements of the tower that absolutely would have an interest in curbing the influence of this final god of pain, and so I think his story is bound to come up at some point again in the future. Imagine, if you will, what happens when the Praxic Creed learns of this. Arnor would possibly learn of a cult's location and willingly charge headfirst into battle, paying them a swift visit. What a story that'd be. Remember that Arnor Mahal is Ikora's, well, not right hand, but certainly chosen executioner within the Agents of the Hidden. So with all that said, yes, Nezarec, despite being dead at the end of Root of Nightmares, might be a potential successor to the Witness as a disciple who could technically survive death. And that brings us to that major point. We cannot rule Nezarec out as dead. So, with that said, he is our most likely suspect and candidate to be a successor for the Witness. And it's here that I quickly want to make a tangent and talk about someone who I don't think is an immediate successor, and that's actually Xivu Arath. The reason why I think Xivu isn't a successor is this. Xivu's power has been greatly decimated. Command of the Taken, command of any Scorn still under the Witness's control, command of the Dread, it probably relies on a great amount of willpower. And here's the thing. If you are standing in Xivu's position, currently you are weak, you are under threat, and you are not necessarily the strongest member of the Hive's godly hierarchy. Their pantheon has never looked more different, and she is now at this stage where she has to choose all of her actions incredibly carefully. Her survival is required in this instance, not her domination. And so, whilst it would be likely that she would ideologically be drawn to the forces of the Witness, it isn't likely that she is going to necessarily push to bring them into her fold unless she has discovered a new source of power. I don't think she is strong enough is the easiest way to put it, and therefore I think she is the most unlikely of disciples or immediate servants of the Witness to become one of its successors. But there are a few other possibilities that we should really discuss. And yeah, this is where things get interesting. Firstly, there's a notion stemming from a very simple question that we've never really answered, which is, how many disciples are there? The true answer is that we don't know. There is a little information that we got to add some clarity to that statement. In Eido's examination of the Witness, as seen in the Final Shape Collector's Edition lore, we can see that the Witness would swiftly conquer civilizations that weren't visited by the Traveler. In particular, Eido notes that this means the Witness didn't have the time to nurture and raise a disciple from those peoples. It means that those, such as the Noesis, didn't have someone ascend, but in places where the Traveler had touched, such as Lubrae, we did see a disciple being chosen. One can see that a little further information and context is therefore given to the origins of each disciple. They all come from places where the Traveler has visited. One can see a little further proof of this when you take a look at the idea that the Traveler visited Fundament, and that the Witness was looking to potentially turn Savathun, who originated from Fundament itself, into a disciple. And of course, there is the question of Mara Sov. For those that don't know, the Witness tried to turn her into a disciple, and a powerful one she would have been had it not been for her greater judgment that it would have been the doom of all things. And of course, she rejected this notion and said no, that she would not become a disciple. So yeah, as a general rule of thumb, any civilization that's been visited by the Traveler could have seen a disciple raised from their ranks. At bare minimum, this means that humanity, the Awoken, the Elixni, the Krill, or Hive, depending on what you call them, the Ammonite, the Harmony, and the people of Lubrae, and who knows how many others, could all have seen disciples raised from their ranks. We know that some of these most certainly were true. Lubrae and the Krill and Hive of Fundament, both of them saw disciples raised. We know that Mara Sov rejected the Witness's offer to become a disciple. And furthermore, we understand that there are potential legends within other civilizations that might ultimately have led to the question of, are these also disciples? Far-off rumors and whispers of times long gone. I mean, take a look at the idea for the Elixni alone of Skira, the Watcher. They're mentioned as a terror for the Elixni people backed by Mithrax in the Season of the Splicer. And a terror they may have been, but they were eventually conquered. However, that is all conjecture on my part, so don't take that as anything other than speculative, because that's exactly what it is. Now, talking about theoretical disciples and their numbers is one thing, but there are two actual examples of disciples that exist in the lore that we've not properly seen in-game and don't even have names yet. These unknown disciples, for disclaimers, could be the same being, and we just don't know. But we do know that there is at least one, potentially two, unknown disciples at this point. And they are the unknown disciple of the cave as listed in the lore book known as Inspiral from Root of Nightmares, and the unknown disciple of Winterbite. So, let's talk about both of them. And let's start with the cave one first, because Plato's cave idea is a really cool one. I've talked at length about this individual before, but in short, within the Inspiral lore book, there is a featured passage that is written from the perspective of an unknown and unnamed disciple of the Witness. They weren't Nezarec, Rulk, or Savathun, and based on the timing of things, they certainly couldn't have been Callus. In short, their message to the witness in that lore passage was simply inquiring as to why it allowed so many alternate perspectives on the final shape to exist among the witness's disciples, even when some of those perspectives clearly clashed. This is all done in the context of comparing it to Plato's analogy of the cave, which is basically a way of saying that the perceptions the disciples have of the final shapes are reality to them, and it's the reality by which the disciples live their lives and operate their creeds. But it also implies that those realities are just shadows of the real thing that the witness is looking to achieve, false copies that aren't given its full texture and definition, and that maybe achieve something close to the function and shape of the final shape, but aren't truly it. We don't hear anything more from this disciple in the lore, and whilst it is possible that they're still alive, or were perhaps combined with our second note of an unknown disciple with Winterbite, I think personally, based on this passage, the witness might have killed them. Now, this is all a hunch, there is no lore supporting this, but I wanted to go ahead and give you an idea of what the witness desires in its disciples, and that is loyalty. It wants supplicants from its disciples, people that will worship its purpose and will not question it. Every single Rulk that it creates is a victory. Every single Callus that it's created is not exactly a victory, but will do as long as they can be kept in line. Questioning the nature of the final shape and why alternate versions of it are allowed to exist within the ranks of the disciples sounds like something that could be very subversive in the right context. There is no proof of this, but I find it hard to imagine that the witness would have stomached such questions and allowed a disciple who asked them to live. So maybe that's the reason why they're unknown, and why we don't know much more of them in the lore. Conjecture again, but I thought it was worth bringing up. And finally, there is the unknown disciple of Winterbite. This one is based on a little bit of custom and tradition within the ranks of the disciples themselves, and it's an observation that I first saw made by fellow lore creator Sticky MZ. The theory goes like this. The disciples all appear to have been presented with one signature weapon as proof of their rank and station and service to the witness, and it's a glaive. Rulk, needless to say, was the first of these. He had his own glaive, Lubre's Ruin, which I suppose technically was reformed after it was broken in the abyss on Lubre, and the witness found Rulk broken at the bottom there too, reforming both him and his glaive, which had been Relics Bane and was then renamed to Lubre's Ruin. This would have been the first. Nezarec in the lore has a moment where he is directly presented with his own glaive from Rulk, which is called Nezarec's Whisper, and there's plenty of indications that the Enigma was actually meant to be the glaive of Savathun when she ascended into a disciple, although it was never created because Savathun betrayed the witness. And the only reason Callus didn't have a glaive of his own was because at that point in time Rulk was dead, and so no one was there to carry on the tradition. So with that in mind, we come to the next glaive on our list, Winterbite. An exotic glaive in the heavy slot from Lightfall. Massive thing this is. The lore of this glaive describes how it was discovered by the crew of the Exodus Indigo on their journey to Neptune. The circumstances of that discovery are remarkable though, because it's an attack. During their retreat, they're holding off the massive Black Fleet vessels, and some kind of massive impact happens on their hull, taking out their 7th engine. They realize that it is not an impact from a weapon, but it's actually a thing, and it's moving out there on the hull. It's a creature that starts then attacking Engine 6. It stabs its weapon, this glaive, Winterbite, into the hull of the ship, directly into Engine 6. At that point, it looks as though everything is going to pot, so they decide that they need to open up the ship's point defense cannons on the thing. Whatever it was, the disciple is likely what it's going to be though. It took a 15mm burst of cannon fire direct to its chest before being dislodged by the guns a second time and being sent hurtling into space. Now, keep in mind, these are PDCs, point defense cannons. They are designed specifically to take out fast-moving micrometeorites in space and break them up to make sure that they don't hit the vessel. These things have to be powerful to perform their job. They're not technically weapons, but they're designed to be able to pack a punch so they can keep the crew alive. With that in mind, whatever this thing was took a direct burst of PDC cannon fire to the chest and lived. It didn't necessarily die, it was dislodged. Yeah, it could have died, but it was capable of surviving in the vacuum in the first place, and it didn't fall over when it was shot. Instead, it just got dislodged. So this thing might well have been recovered by the Black Fleet, especially when you remember that the Black Fleet has weapons and technology that can manipulate gravity, meaning that a retrieval of an individual who's surviving in the vacuum of space is not impossible whatsoever. With all of that being said, I think it is worth pointing out we do not know definitively that this was a disciple. I think it is just worth remembering that there is a possibility that it was the case, and that possibility is based purely on the fact that this disciple was wielding a glaive. We don't know that this is enough proof of it, but there is enough conclusive proof to put things in the realm of possibility, so I figured it was worth talking about. So, with all of those different surviving or potentially surviving disciples in place, I think it's still clear that Nezarec is the likely claimant of the Witness's forces upon its defeat. But there are a few possibilities for the futures that we must consider, and none of them are going to be good if they come to pass. One positive note we can make is that the disciples are less likely to be united as a greater force in the future if more than one of them persists. And that is simply because they have no leader themselves. With no true leader to keep them in line like the Witness, it is possible that they will squabble amongst themselves and fight for greater control. So even if we do see a true successor to the Witness, it's not impossible that we could pull them apart and could play off different factions against each other. The Witness's forces are not going to be the one unified block that they were at one point in time. Now, they are much more susceptible to division, and for that alone, we should think that we have more of an advantage than we've ever had before. But that's all from me for now. Let me know if you enjoyed the video by liking it, and of course, if you have your own thoughts, leave them down below in the comments section. Let me know who you think a potential successor to the Witness might be. I'm intrigued in particular by the Nezarec and the Xivu Arath questions. Do you reckon that I've got my analysis correct there? Because if I have, well, cool, but if not, it means I've missed another intriguing possibility regarding their stories, and I'd love to hear it. Of course, know that if you want more Destiny content, you can hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Rodacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.